What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to the Home Field Podcast. So, for today's episode, we're going to go over a few topics. The first one being Carson Wentz going to the Indianapolis Colts. I was supposed to do an episode last week that was going to talk about this topic with Carson Wentz going to the Colts, but I just got hung up with work last week. So, I'll go over a little bit of the trade. Most of you guys know the information that's pertinent to that topic, but I'm just going to do a quick summary on what I think the trade is going to be for the Colts and the Eagles moving forward. After that, we'll talk about a little bit about the Warriors and how Draymond Green's antics over the last couple weeks have cost the Warriors some games this season, and we'll do somewhat of a dive into that discussion as well with Draymond Green. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about the sweepstakes that are going around for Deshaun Watson at this point. Things are heating up. You got some teams making some moves to free up some cap space that could be in line to make some sort of trade package for the Houston Texans to acquire Deshaun Watson in the very near future. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about a viral video that has been going around Twitter about this kid at Cam Newton's camp where he's basically just disrespecting Cam Newton in front of his face with everybody watching. But we'll get to that at the latter part of the episode. But we'll first go over the Carson Wentz trade. So, as you guys pretty much know at this point, Carson Wentz is now an Indianapolis Colts. He was traded to Indianapolis last week. And pretty much as the trade goes at this particular moment in time, the way that it's structured is Carson goes to Indianapolis. Indy sends a couple of draft picks to Philly. The only caveat is that they're second round draft picks, but if Carson Wentz ends up playing 75% of the games or more this season and next season as well, those draft picks turn into first round draft picks, much to the chagrin of a lot of Colts fans. But here's what I'll say about this trade, just from a big picture perspective. I think that this is a fair trade across the board, simply because Indianapolis finally doesn't have to worry about their quarterback position for at least the next couple of years. I think Carson Wentz is going to be a pretty solid quarterback to have for Indianapolis moving forward. Kevin and I kind of talked about this topic maybe about a week and a half ago, where you could definitely see Carson Wentz's career completely revitalized in Indianapolis simply because he's pairing up with his old offensive coordinator where he played outstanding football, arguably was having an MVP season, I believe in 2017 before he ended up tearing his ACL. I think that was the year that Tom Brady ended up winning the MVP instead. Now he gets to go back to Frank Reich. He gets to go to a team that offensively is pretty well balanced. They have a great running back field with Jonathan Taylor, Naheem Hines, and what's the guy's name? I'm forgetting the third running back's name. He tore his Achilles this offseason. I'm just drawing a blank on the name. If I figure it out later, I'll bring it up. But Marlon Mack. Marlon Mack is the other running back that I had in mind. So you got a solid running back core in the backfield. Whether they all stay or not, we'll see. But still, it's a solid group. They have a pretty solid wide receiving core, and they have a solid tight end group as well. So you pair those skill positions with the offensive line that the Indianapolis Colts have, I think they'll be just fine offensively. So far, from what I've seen with his new teammates, it seems to me that he's gotten off to the right foot. Obviously, as the offseason training activities start, we'll see if the relationship builds not only with the coaching staff, but with the teammates as well. And I think for the Colts, this arguably puts them in a situation where I think that they could be a top 3, top 4 team in the AFC if Carson plays well. I think if you add all those factors with Indianapolis's offensive line, their solid running back core, and a reliable tight end and wide receiver wide receiver position to throw to, I think they could have a real good shot of winning the AFC South this year. Obviously, they have to go up against the Titans this year, and that's always going to be a tough divisional foe to have. But they have a really good shot at making some progress with this trade. Not only that, the Colts don't have to worry about the cap hit that Carson had upcoming this season. Philly was able to take up to $30 million of his cap hit for this season, which definitely helps out Indianapolis for this season. Now, for Philly's in a situation where I think they had just completely burned the bridge with Carson Wentz, and I think most of that responsibility is laid at the feet of Doug Peterson. He was the one that I think really set the tone for really the complete downturn of this relationship between the Eagles and Carson Wentz. So, it really kind of got to the point where it was so bad that Carson didn't seem like he was getting protected by his teammates. And there were times where Kevin and I had talked about this on one of the episodes just a few weeks ago, where it looked like his offensive line didn't even want to block for him. And that is just something that you cannot have. It completely disrupts the trust with your teammates. And it got to a point where Carson ended up getting benched, and then Jalen Hurts ended up playing the last couple games that Philly had at the end of the regular season. So I think with all those factors going forward, Philly is off to a new start with Jalen Hurts. And even that, I don't even know if that's going to really be the solution. I've also seen reports coming out that the Eagles may bring in a quarterback to stir up some sort of quarterback competition going into this season. Now, whether or not that helps Jalen Hurts or not, we'll see. But it seems to me that the Eagles need to build around Jalen Hurts at this point. They've got to do something to address the receiver position because Alshon Jeffrey is getting pretty old, and he's not as reliable and as dependable with his health anymore because he missed most of last season due to injuries. Deshaun Jackson just got released, and you don't have Nelson Aguilar anymore. I know that Aguilar had some issues with drops when he was with Philly, but he's over in Oakland. He's not in Oakland. He's over in Las Vegas now, and they're going to have to completely revamp this offense for Jalen Hurts. They do have a solid running back game, so I think they're definitely going to rely on that going into this season, and they're definitely going to rely on Jalen Hurts using his legs to extend plays. But Philly's going to start all over, and maybe that's just for the better at this point. I know Philly fans are probably absolutely disgusted with the way that it ended with Carson Wentz, but it just seems like Philly has just completely moved past from that Super Bowl win that they had a couple years ago, and it looks like they are now really entering a dark time for the next couple years. Hopefully it doesn't last too long. Hopefully they can right the ship fairly quickly, but it's going to be a while, I think, before the Philadelphia Eagles really see some long-term success. But Jalen Hurts is going to be, I think, the guy to lead the team, but I guess we'll find out as we get closer to the season and whether or not the Eagles as an organization and as a coaching staff want to start this possibility of having a quarterback competition between Jalen Hurts and then some unknown quarterback at this moment in time. So, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about with the Carson Wentz trade. I know I was supposed to talk about that last week, but just didn't have enough time to sit down and do an episode last week just because I got a little bit too busy with work, but just wanted to knock out a quick summary or a quick opinion on what I thought of the trade overall. So up next, we've got a little bit of Draymond Green and a little bit of Golden State Warriors talk here for a minute. So the reason why I'm bringing up the Warriors is they were playing against the Charlotte Hornets this past weekend. And to be quite honest with you, it was actually a very competitive game right up until the end of the game. But we'll fast forward to about 10 to 9 seconds left in the game. The Warriors are up 100 to 98. And I believe that there was a jump ball and Draymond Green and Gordon Hayward were fighting for the ball on the ground, and they were trying to get possession between the both of them. And it looked like when I first watched it that they were going to call a jump ball. However, the ref ruled that Charlotte had possession and that they were able to call a timeout, and then the ref awarded Charlotte a timeout with 9 seconds left in the game. Now, Draymond did not take too kindly to this. Draymond started getting chippy with the refs, and I will say this: the Warriors teammates around Draymond definitely tried to hold him back to not get him a technical. But Draymond kept pushing the issue, and eventually he got ejected from the game because he just kept chirping at the refs and pushing the issue about the refs calling for a timeout awarded to Charlotte instead of calling for a jump ball. To make matters worse, Charlotte on the next possession, they tie the game, and then at the end of the game, Charlotte wins on a game-winning shot from Terry Rozier, and Charlotte ends up getting the win, I believe 102-100 over Golden State. Now, this was a game that Golden State should have won. They're up 2 points with just about 10 seconds left in the game. Even if Charlotte gets the ball after that jump ball with about 15 seconds left, if they play solid defense against Charlotte, they have a very good shot to win the game just based off of their defense. But Draymond got into a situation where he couldn't control himself after getting tied up with Gordon Hayward and freaking out about the refs calling a timeout for Charlotte instead of just focusing on the fact, well, they got the timeout and they're just going to have to deal with it. And it honestly cost Golden State a pretty good win on the road against Charlotte. This is the point that I want to bring up, and it's specifically related to Draymond. Draymond has been chirping a lot this year, particularly this year, just after these games that they've been playing in the press conferences that he's had. He's been getting a little chippy. And I'm going to flip the script here, and I'm going to start chirping about Draymond because I think the world needs to know what Draymond's been up to this season. So we'll first start with the fact that Draymond's only averaging 5 points a game this year on 35% shooting. Not only that, every major statistical category that he has this year is down compared to last year, except for assists. He has not been playing up to snuff. He has been playing terrible basketball. Not only that, not only did he cost that Warriors game against Charlotte the other day, he's cost them multiple games this season already. Draymond took an awful 40-foot shot against San Antonio 2 weeks ago to tie the game. They were down 103-100. Draymond gets the ball off the inbound pass and chucks it from 40 feet, and it bricks off the backboard. I remember that shot, and trust me, Twitter remembers that shot as well after they roasted him after that game. As far as I'm concerned, Steph is the only person on that team, on the Warriors, who is allowed to take those types of shots from 40 feet out, not Draymond Green. Steph consistently hits those 35 to 40-foot shots, basically those logo shots. And Draymond is not somebody that I would really trust at the end of the game to be throwing up 35, 40-foot shots to tie the game. But I'm not finished yet. Draymond's been ejected a dozen times throughout his career. He was drafted in 2012. It is now 2021. Draymond's been in the league for almost 10 years. And yet he still doesn't know how to act when things don't go his way, the way that he wants them to. He freaks out on the refs against Charlotte the other day, and it cost his team a win against the Hornets. Not only that, one of your ejections from a couple years ago cost the Warriors an NBA title against Cleveland when you decided to hit LeBron James in the nuts. You cost your team NBA immortality with that move. You guys went 73-9. You guys were one win away from being the best team in NBA history, but you decided that you had to hit LeBron James in the nuts because you felt disrespected after he stepped over you when you guys got wrapped up together. Listen, I could go on and on about Draymond just because of really the BS that he's been on the entire year. I don't want to hear anything more about what he's saying after the game because what he's doing on the court this year has been abysmal. 5 points a game at 35% from the field, that's not going to cut it. And it's not going to cut it getting to the playoffs this year. I mean, they're 15-15 right now. They're basically treading water. And Steph is going out there and pretty much dropping 30 to 35 points a game. And in some games, he's dropping at least 40. And yet you got Draymond who's out here with his measly 5 points a game. So, like I said, I can go on and on about this, but I'm going to wrap this up. The two things that Draymond needs to focus on moving forward is just, first of all, focus on your game. You need to get those stats up because those stats are not going to cut it. And second of all, you got to help your team win, not cost your team wins. Because if you don't fix this sooner rather than later, you might know what it feels like to be in the shoes of Andre Drummond and Blake Griffin, like you mentioned in your press conference just a few days ago. At this point, if you know, you know. I'm just going to leave it at that just because the Warriors have dealt with this for years. It is now starting to rear its ugly head. It is costing them games this year. And look, I'm not saying that right now that they should be actively trading Draymond Green or actively shopping him at this point. But if he keeps antics up like this, he's going to cost the Warriors at least a couple games, probably 5 to 6 games this year with the late game decisions or just the late game antics that he has. You cannot have that. He's basically a 10-year veteran at this point, and he's setting a terrible example for the rookies like James Wiseman, who James Wiseman has been playing absolutely fantastic basketball as a rookie so far this year. So, as far as I'm concerned, Draymond, you got to get it together, man. Just focus on your game, get those stats up, and just get the team some wins. And take some pressure off of Steph, because Steph is basically carrying you guys at this point. But I'm going to leave it at that. So, we'll move on to Deshaun Watson and the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes. So, there have been some reports over the last couple of days of some teams making some moves to free up some cap space where they could potentially go after Deshaun Watson in the next couple of weeks or so. So, just to kind of give you guys a quick update. So, we'll start with the Carolina Panthers. So, Carolina Panthers cleared a significant amount of cap space this past weekend by releasing a couple players. So, they released K'Wan Short, Stephen Weatherly, and Trey Boston. All those guys were veterans in the league, but with those guys being released from the team, it does free up a bunch of cap space for them and almost more than doubles their cap space at this point. So they are somewhere around $28 million, $29 million in cap space now. So they're just a tick under $30 million at this point for cap space. So it does seem to me, and to I think most people around the NFL, that Carolina is gearing up to make a significant trade package for Deshaun at this point. If I had to guess, this trade package would probably include Teddy Bridgewater and a significant amount of draft capital as well, potentially up to 2 to 3 first-round draft picks, maybe even some later round draft picks as well. But I want to get into really the 4 teams that I think have a realistic shot to land Deshaun Watson in these next couple weeks. And I only think that there's 4. It's the Jets, the Panthers, the Dolphins, and the 49ers. I didn't mention the Jaguars simply because they're probably going after Trevor Lawrence this year in the draft. I just don't see a scenario where the Jaguars completely avoid Trevor Lawrence in the draft this year. He's the number 1 pick pretty much across the board. And it would absolutely stun everybody if Jacksonville decided to make a 180 and not draft Trevor Lawrence in the draft this year. It would boggle everybody. But the reason why I mentioned those four teams in the Jets, the Panthers, the Dolphins, and the 49ers is that they have the cap space available to go after Deshaun, and they all have quarterback questions that may need to be addressed over these next couple of weeks. The only caveat with this is that Deshaun's cap hit for 2021 is just a tick over $15 million, but next year his cap hit jumps over to $40 million in 2022. So it's going to be a major issue whoever trades for him next year, because they're going to have a lot of cap space available to accommodate for that huge bump in his cap hit not this season, but the year after that. So we'll do a hypothetical process of elimination here. So we'll start with Miami first. So to me, I'm really 50-50 on Miami at this point. One could say that Miami should stay away from Deshaun and just build around Tua. They have 2 first-round picks this year. I believe they have the 3rd pick and then the 18th pick this year. And with those picks, they could possibly add Devontae Smith, and they could pair up the old Crimson Tide teammates in Tua and Devontae Smith. And if you guys don't remember, Tua was the guy who threw Devontae Smith the game-winning pass against Georgia in the national championship just a few years ago. So to see that possibility come to fruition in the draft this year, it's a real possibility this year, and it would definitely bolster Miami's wide receiving core, and that 1-2 punch with Devontae Smith and Devontae Parker could be a significant one if Miami decides to go if they decide to go that route. But at the same time, Miami does have some leverage with those draft picks, and they could use those picks in a trade package along with Tua Tagovailoa to go after Deshaun Watson. But my verdict with this one is that I don't think Deshaun goes to Miami. I think Tua is a better option moving forward. He comes at a cheaper price. The Dolphins as a team last year went 10-6, and Miami was able to build some solid momentum at the end of the year before getting blown out by Buffalo at the end of the year. And I think if you factor in Deshaun's cap hit for 2022, I think it would just really hinder this team across the board if they were to trade for him. That defense, I think, would certainly take a hit because they'd probably look to cut some of the bloated contracts on the defensive side of the ball, but try to maintain the offense as best as they can. And I just think that with that moving forward, it really stunts the team as a whole. And I think it puts too much pressure on the offense to carry the team moving forward. So my verdict is I don't see Deshaun going to Miami. I think they should stick with Tua, but I'm really 50-50 on this one. So it's really just a coin flip at this point. So the 49ers are the next team that I have. And this is a team that I personally want to see Deshaun Watson on, simply because of the creativity that they can have in Kyle Shanahan's offensive system. If you pair Deshaun Watson with the running backs they have, with Raheem Mostert, Tevin Coleman, the receivers they have in Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, and then you have arguably one of the best tight ends in the game with George Kittle, that is a scary offense that defenses are going to be sweating bullets about to defend on a week-to-week basis. But similar to Miami, my verdict is I don't see Deshaun Watson going to San Francisco either. Look, they have Jimmy G still. And mind you, the 49ers are only a year removed from going to the Super Bowl, and they were up 20-10 halfway through the fourth quarter against the Chiefs. And the Chiefs are one of the best teams of recent memory, but they just couldn't hold a lead against Kansas City. They ended up losing that Super Bowl. And if you look at this past year, look, injuries and COVID completely derailed this team this season. And even despite the fact that they had so many injuries and they had their COVID issues as well, they were still somewhat of a viable team despite having literally half the team hurt at some point in the season. So Patrick Willis a couple of days ago was on record saying that the 49ers should stick with Jimmy G because he's of the mindset that they can win with him. And I'm kind of the similar mindset. I think if they're able to retool around Jimmy G and hopefully keep those guys healthy this year, I think they have a real good shot at competing for the NFC West this year. Mind you, they had so many injuries this year, and I think at one point they were still treading water, like 5-6. They were only one game under 500. That team should have been probably, realistically, this year should have been like a 4-12 team with all the injuries they had, and they only finished, if I remember right, they finished like 6-10 or 7-9, which is quite an impressive feat with how many injuries that they had. So, with that said, that leaves us with two teams. That leaves us with the Panthers and the Jets. Pretty much this is where I see this going. I'm not going to pick on whether or not I think the Jets are going to pick them, or the Jets are going to get him, or the Panthers are going to get him. I just know this. I don't see a scenario where he ends up in Denver or he ends up in Chicago. I don't see any of those possibilities happening. I think for Denver's sake, I think they're just going to stick with Drew Lock, even though that they have the cap space available to go after Deshaun. I just don't know how I see Deshaun Watson going to Denver. I don't know. I can't envision a scenario with him actually being in a Broncos jersey next year, which just seemed kind of odd to me. Now, there have been mentions of Deshaun possibly getting traded to Chicago. I don't think it happens simply because they just don't have the cap space available to make this work. Look, Chicago going into this offseason already was over the cap. They'd have to really start clearing out a significant amount of their cap space within the next week or so to really be a viable team in Deshaun Watson's services at this point. If I had to guess at this point, I think Chicago's just going to settle with Trubisky in free agency. It's either that or go with Nick Foles. Because they've made no indication to clear any of their cap space for Deshaun Watson in a possible trade package. And I think they might just stick with what they know. And Trubisky did play a little bit better at the end of the season. So they may stick with him for, I guess, the near future if they decide to re-sign him. But I guess for Chicago, it's like they're not really going to go anywhere. I think Mitchell Trubisky at best is an average quarterback, but most of the time he's a mediocre quarterback who turns the ball over too much. So, I mean, for me personally, I think Deshaun Watson would be fine in Chicago. I just don't think that they have really the requisite cap space to go after him at this point. If they start making moves to free up some cap space, then you definitely have to consider Chicago moving forward. I just don't see that. Like I kind of said a few minutes ago, I only have two teams at this point really going after Deshaun Watson and really potentially landing him. And that's the Panthers and the Jets. And out of those two, if you had to flip a coin at this point, I would go with the Panthers simply because I don't know if Houston wants to trade him inside the conference. So right now, Houston's in the AFC South. And if they were to end up trading him to the Jets, it would still be within the conference. They would just be trading him to a different division in the AFC East. That still means that over the next couple of years that you could be matched up against Deshaun in some of the games within the next, 3 to 5 years or so, or even longer. So I think if Houston is really considering trading Deshaun at this point, I think they would trade it out of conference. And I do think that the Panthers do seem to be a team that could actually be a solid team to build around Deshaun Watson. It's either that or the 49ers, but the 49ers would have to move Jimmy G and accommodate for Deshaun Watson. Like I said, for me personally, I would love to see Deshaun on the 49ers, but I think they're going to stick with Jimmy G. That's just my personal opinion, but I would love to see Deshaun there. And if I had to guess between the Jets and the Panthers, like I said, this is just all speculation. This is completely hypothetical. I don't know what's going to happen with Deshaun over these next couple weeks. But if I had to pick between the Jets and the Panthers, I would say the Panthers. That's just kind of my initial take at this. But, we'll see what happens over the next couple weeks or so. We'll definitely find out what these trade packages are going to look like for Deshaun Watson. And I imagine they are going to be pretty substantial moving forward. And then to wrap up the episode, we'll talk a little bit about Cam Newton getting disrespected at his own camp. So Cam Newton was holding a training camp for a bunch of kids that he probably does on an annual basis. And there's a video going around of this kid basically trolling Cam Newton, basically calling him trash, calling him a free agent, basically said that he's going to end up broke with not being on a team. And mind you, he's saying all this stuff to Cam Newton's face. And when I was watching the video, and you guys are more than welcome to watch the video, it's on YouTube, so you can find it pretty quickly. I thought Cam actually handled it pretty well. This is a teenager kid that's just out to troll Cam because, look, Cam did not have the best year this year with New England. Obviously, going into this season, he didn't have a training program with New England this year. Went to a completely new system coming off of a major shoulder surgery just a year ago. And there were a lot of factors that were going against Cam this year. And the 9 COVID dropouts from New England this last season did not help this situation either. And really, Cam struggled to throw the ball consistently and effectively. I believe he only had like 4 or 5 passing touchdowns the entire season. Most of his touchdowns came from running the ball. I believe he was by far the league leader in rushing touchdowns among quarterbacks this year. But look, Cam just didn't seem like really a good fit in New England. Obviously, they tried to do their best to integrate him into a system and kind of build an offensive system around Cam to play him to his strengths. But I think when you look at recency bias, Cam did not play well, and I think this kid that was getting in Cam's face about this definitely had that in mind and definitely let Cam know about it. And I thought Cam handled it well. You know, to take disrespect, I know Cam didn't probably think of it as disrespect, it's just some kid trolling. But look, when I went in on Draymond, I was talking about Draymond's game. This kid was talking about Cam Newton's character. So Cam Newton is not that good of a football player anymore. He was a solid player back in his heyday with the Carolina Panthers. Won an MVP and got to a Super Bowl. So he had to be playing somewhat decent football back then to be in a Super Bowl and to win an MVP. Hasn't lived up to those expectations since. He's fallen short of those expectations many times since that MVP season. But I think this kid was picking the wrong fight going up against Cam, who is one of the most athletic quarterbacks we've ever seen in the NFL, but definitely not one of the most accurate passers in the game. Really does focus heavily on his legs to make plays, but I think this kid was a little out of line to be talking smack to Cam in his face, basically saying that you're going to end up broke. And Cam's only response was that I'm rich. He just kept saying that back to this kid, and that was pretty much the only thing that I could really think of to kind of come back with. Because if some kid is going to troll me and say that I'm going to be broke, I was like, well, I'm already rich to begin with, so I don't really have any problems. So I guess I'm in a better situation than a lot of people are, so just kind of leave it at that. But with that said, you guys, that'll wrap up the episode. I want to thank you guys for tuning in, whether you were listening to this on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whether you were watching this on YouTube. I appreciate the support. So Kev will be returning later this week. He just moved into his new apartment. He's still setting up. I imagine he'll probably take another day or two to get that all squared away with. But he will be on our next episode, probably say Thursday. I imagine we'll probably sit down Wednesday night, probably record, I'd say maybe an hour episode. We're probably going to talk about Deshaun Watson a little bit. I wanted to definitely get his take about the Carson Wentz trade because he's a diehard Colts fan, and I know that he's going to have a lot to talk about with this. So we won't go too much into depth about the whole Carson Wentz trade, but I definitely want to get his thoughts and sentiments on that trade. We'll go over some NBA news. We'll probably go over at some point the midseason awards in the NBA, who has really stood out from the pack in the NBA, who has fallen short of expectations this year, who is the MVP leader at this point, who's the Rookie of the Year leader at this point, things like that. Those are probably some things that we'll eventually be going over, whether it's on the next episode we do or one later in the future, probably within like the next week or two. But it should be fun. I hope you guys tune in to the episode with Kev and I later this week. And with that said, you guys, that'll wrap it up from here. Once again, thank you guys for tuning in, whether it was through YouTube or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. I appreciate it. And I'll see you guys later. Take it easy, you guys.